It was just a quiet morning when he decided to take a walk, but then he stumbled upon an unusual sight on the train tracks. A large German shepherd, standing alone, motionless as if frozen, dangerously close to the cold iron rails. What happened next stunned everyone, proving that even souls that seemed to have given up could still rise to fight for life. You wouldn't believe how this story ends. Around just past 6 a.m., Caleb Turner took his usual shortcut to work. The sky still held a faint gray hue, and the tracks behind the industrial park were silent, with no trains due for at least another hour. He walked this route almost every day. It saved him 10 minutes, and he enjoyed the peaceful solitude. But that day, something made him pause. As he crossed the first stretch of gravel between the rails, he stopped dead in his tracks. Ahead, about 15 meters away, a dog lay motionless between the rails, a big one. At first, Caleb thought it might be injured, or perhaps even dead. But then its ears twitched slightly. It was alive. He held his breath. It was a German shepherd, its fur caked with dust and dirt, ribs protruding, one leg tucked awkwardly beneath its body. There was no leash, no chain, yet it didn't move. It just lay there, its eyes following Caleb as he approached, deep black eyes, alert, glinting with a fear he rarely encountered. Caleb stepped forward slowly, crouching down. "Hey, little buddy," he called softly. "Are you okay?" The dog didn't growl or bark, but its body tensed. Caleb stopped a few meters away and took a deep breath. Its gaze locked onto him. Then, for a fleeting moment, its head dipped, and its lips trembled. Caleb understood that look. It wasn't aggression, but surrender. This dog wasn't just lost, it had lost all hope. He pulled out his phone, snapped a quick photo, and sent it to a local rescue group he followed on social media. The message was brief. "German shepherd on the tracks, seems abandoned, not aggressive, needs urgent help." Almost instantly, his phone rang. Maggie, the rescue coordinator, spoke urgently. "Don't leave it. We're on our way, but you need to keep it calm. A train's coming in 45 minutes. Caleb glanced at the dog, then down the tracks. A faint metallic hum echoed in the distance. He edged closer. The dog flinched slightly but didn't flee. Caleb sat on the ground, slowly opening an energy bar and holding it out. "Hungry, buddy?" It didn't respond, but its eyes flicked toward the wrapper. Then, moving as if battling pain, it inched forward a little. Caleb noticed something wrong with its right hind leg. The wound was visible, deep, red, likely infected. It had probably been hit before, not by a train, but perhaps by a car or something worse. "Don't be afraid," Caleb whispered. "Everything's going to be okay." Time passed, 10 minutes, then 20. He sat still, barely breathing, holding out the food and talking nonstop. Finally, the dog crawled forward and took the bar from his hand. That was the first spark of hope. But just then, the tracks began to tremble. A train was barreling toward them, faster than he'd expected, and the dog was still caught between life and death. The vibrations turned into a roar. Caleb's heart pounded fiercely. He looked down the tracks. The train's headlights sliced through the mist, still some distance away but closing in fast. The ground shook harder with each passing second. He glanced at the dog. It was panting, confused, but unmoving. "Come on!" Caleb shouted, leaping to his feet, his voice breaking. "Get up, please!" But the dog didn't understand. It wasn't just exhausted, it was shattered, physically and emotionally, with no will left to move. Caleb dropped to his knees and slid his arms under its chest. The dog let out a soft growl, a warning sound, but not out of anger, rather fear. Its body stiffened, instinct kicking in to resist. It didn't trust anyone yet, and now trust was its only way out. "Look at me!" Caleb shouted over the roaring train. The dog's wild eyes met his. "I won't hurt you." A second passed, then 2. The growling stopped. Caleb wrapped his arms around its chest and hind legs, lifting with all his strength. It was heavy, about 36 kilograms, and pain made its body rigid. But it didn't bite. It let him carry it. The train's horn blared piercingly. Caleb stumbled backward, half hugging, half dragging it across the tracks. Gravel scraped his hands, his knees slammed into a rail, the vibrations coursing through him. He cleared the final rail just as the train rushed past. The wind from the engine nearly knocked him over, but they had made it. Caleb collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The dog lay beside him, chest heaving, eyes wide, alive. A small sound escaped its throat, not a bark, not a whimper, but a faint, choked sob. Caleb reached out, gently stroking its neck. "You're okay," he said, voice trembling. "You're safe now." 15 minutes later, headlights appeared on a nearby road. Maggie stepped out of an SUV, accompanied by a veterinary technician named Rena. When they saw the dog lying next to Caleb, leaning slightly toward him like a shadow, they both froze. "Unbelievable," Maggie whispered. "It let you get close?" Caleb nodded. "It was tough, but yes." Rena knelt down, examining the wound on its leg. "It's bad. Probably infected for days. It's exhausted, starving." "What do you think happened to it?" Caleb asked. Maggie glanced at Rena. "We've heard about a backyard breeder dumping dogs upstate," she said. "A few German shepherds, all skittish, all abused. This might be the last one they left behind." The dog was lightly sedated and loaded into Maggie's vehicle. Before the door closed, Caleb knelt down, looking into its eyes. "You held on just long enough." It blinked slowly. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. His hands still smelled of fur and dirt, his mind echoed with the train's roar. But above all, he couldn't forget those eyes, eyes that had been ready to give up but chose hope instead. The next morning, Maggie texted, "It made it through the night, eating, resting, but it only lets you touch it." Caleb arrived at the rescue shelter at noon. The place was quiet, nestled near the woods, rarely visited unless something was wrong. But today, he was there for a different reason. Maggie greeted him at the gate, holding paperwork. "You came back already?" Caleb nodded. "I can't stop thinking about it. It's in quarantine for now, just to check for infections." "Can I see it?" She smiled. "It's been waiting for you." They led him to a large kennel in the back corner, furnished with clean blankets, water, and food. The German shepherd lay there, its fur washed, leg bandaged, looking better despite still being thin and patchy. But its eyes remained the same, silent, watchful, full of doubt. Caleb crouched by the kennel. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. It didn't move, didn't growl, but its eyes stayed fixed on him. Maggie stood back, observing. "When we cleaned it up, it wouldn't let anyone near," she said. "But when we mentioned you, its ears twitched." Caleb looked up. "It remembers me? More than that, it's chosen you." For the next 20 minutes, Caleb sat still, speaking softly to let it get used to his voice. At one point, it stretched its front paw slightly toward the bars, just a little. Caleb didn't move, only smiled. In the waiting room, Maggie filled out forms. "No chip, no collar, no name," she said. "Want to give it one?" Caleb thought for a moment, then a name came naturally. "Ghost," Maggie asked. "Why that?" "Because it almost vanished," he replied. "But now it's coming back." The next day, he brought a towel and an old shirt carrying his scent. Ghost sniffed them carefully, then curled up on the towel, resting its head on the shirt as if they'd always belonged to it. By the weekend, Ghost stood up when Caleb arrived, not always, but enough to show progress. 2 weeks later, its wound began to heal, fur regrowing in small patches. It still flinched at loud noises and shrank into the corner when strangers approached, but with Caleb, it moved forward, even touching the gate with its paw. On a calm Wednesday afternoon, Caleb opened the kennel door. He didn't step inside, just sat outside. Ghost walked out and lay beside him. Its eyes still held shadows of the past, but now it had something new, someone it trusted, and little by little, it was learning to trust again. But Caleb had no idea that his first post had caught someone's eye, someone who recognized Ghost and was about to reveal something that would change everything. A message arrived at 2:07 a.m. via Facebook. Caleb was restless when his phone buzzed. He thought it was a random notification, but it wasn't. "I think that's my old dog in your photo. Please read this." He sat up, heart racing. The sender's profile was private, but their picture showed a woman kneeling beside a German shepherd, identical to Ghost, but younger, healthier. The photo was timestamped 2 years ago. He messaged back. "What do you know about it?" She replied instantly. "Its name is Ranger. I raised it from a puppy. My ex took it during our divorce and wouldn't give it back. I don't know what he did to it, but I've been searching for it ever since." Caleb felt a chill. He thought about Ghost's hesitance, the wound, the way it stayed silent, always waiting for something bad. It wasn't just abuse, it was abandonment after being loved. Jessica sent more photos: Ranger in a field, Ranger by a Christmas tree, Ranger sleeping next to a crib. Same eyes, same coat, same tiny scar on its ear. Ghost was Ranger, once cherished, not always broken. Caleb drove to the shelter at dawn. Maggie met him. "Something up?" He showed her the messages. She read them, sighed. "I believe her. This is real." They brought Ghost to the backyard. It walked more steadily, sniffing the morning breeze. Maggie said, "We have to let her see it." Caleb nodded. "I know. Do you think it'll remember?" He watched Ghost pause, their eyes meeting. "I think it already does." Jessica arrived that afternoon, in her mid-30s, wearing a hoodie, clutching a trembling framed photo. She stepped into the yard, whispering, "Ranger." Ghost stood still, ears perked. She knelt, placing the frame on the grass. "It's me, Jess. I never forgot you." Caleb and Maggie held their breath from a distance. Ghost took a step, then another, let out a broken whimper, and rushed to her. Jessica hugged it tightly, sobbing. "I'm sorry." It leaned into her, wagging its tail for the first time in Caleb's presence. Later, in the office, Jessica spoke through tears. "I want it to be happy, but I'm not sure I can provide that anymore. I'm in a cramped place, no yard, no stability." She looked at Caleb. "It's calm with you." He nodded. "I won't let it suffer again." That night, Ghost lay by Caleb's bed. The wind blew softly, and he whispered, "Welcome home, Ranger." But the story wasn't over. A dangerous figure lingered out there, not ready to let Ranger go. 3 days later, it, whether called Ghost or Ranger, was calmer, sleeping soundly by the bedroom door. Yet sometimes, loud noises or deep voices made it tremble. Caleb knew pain still lingered inside. One Saturday morning, he tossed the toy in the yard. Ranger chased it, not quite playful but engaged. His phone rang, a strange number. "Caleb Turner?" "Yes." "You adopted a dog from Ash Grove, right? I'm Detective Lyle Carter. We're investigating Brent Holloway, animal cruelty, illegal breeding." Caleb fell silent. Jessica had mentioned that name before. "We found a crate with the words Ranger, do not feed unless working. Bites written on it." That night, Caleb watched Ranger sleep, twitching in its dreams. He placed a hand on its back. "You're never going back there." But Brent was out on bail and might be looking for it. 2 nights later, Caleb returned home late and spotted a truck parked near his house. It drove off as he approached. Inside, Ranger stood at the door. Its fur was starting to grow back in patches. It still flinched at loud noises and retreated to the corner when strangers came near, but with Caleb, it stepped forward, even touching the gate with its paw. One peaceful Wednesday afternoon, Caleb opened the kennel door. He didn't go in, just sat outside. Ghost stepped out and lay beside him. Its eyes still carried shadows of the past, but now it had something new, someone it trusted, and bit by bit, it was learning to trust again. The next day, Caleb saw the truck near his house again. Ranger stood at the door, eyes sharp, not afraid, but ready. He called the detective. He was here. Caleb wasn't scared. He wanted to protect. That evening, he fastened a new collar around Ranger's neck, engraved with its name. "Ranger. I've got you," he said. Ranger placed a paw on his chest, a silent pledge. Past midnight, the security camera alerted him. A figure appeared near the fence, then vanished. Ranger growled softly, its gaze locked outside the window. Caleb grabbed a flashlight, tucked a gun behind his back, and opened the door. "Brent," he called. "Didn't think you'd find him, did you?" A voice emerged from the darkness. Brent stepped forward. "He's mine." "Not anymore," Caleb replied. Brent clapped his hands. "You hear me, boy?" Ranger didn't budge. He barked sharply. Ranger turned its head and growled a warning. Brent stepped back. "So now you're loyal, huh?" Caleb said. "All you gave him was fear. He's free now." Brent reached for something, but Ranger lunged forward, positioning itself between them, not to attack, just to stare him down. Brent froze, unnerved by those eyes, not a victim's, but a guardian's. Caleb raised his phone. "I've got you on video. Leave now." Brent backed off, muttering, "Keep him." The next day, Brent was arrested for trespassing and threatening behavior. Ranger watched the police car drive away, wagged its tail, and licked Caleb's hand, a gesture of thanks. But Caleb wanted to give it a chance to reclaim itself. A month later, he took Ranger to Ranger's Run, a field created by Jessica and the shelter. It ran freely, met Jessica again, then looked to Caleb as if asking permission. "Go on," he said. Ranger bolted across the grass, truly alive for the first time. He attached a new tag to its collar. "Ranger. It's yours now," he whispered. That night, Ranger lay on Caleb's porch, letting out a contented sigh. They sat together in peace. Some scars never fade, but in the right hands they stop hurting. If this story moves you, share it. Every second chance matters. Winter arrived gently on the quiet roads around Ash Grove. A thin layer of snow blanketed Caleb's porch, soft and delicate like a tender embrace. Ranger, the name now truly its own, curled up on an old rug Caleb had placed by the fireplace. The flickering flames danced across its thicker fur, the once patchy coat now full and soft. The scar on its hind leg remained, but it was just a faint memory now, no longer a source of pain. Caleb sat by the window, holding a steaming mug of tea, gazing into the silent night. His phone lit up with a message from Jessica. "I visited Ranger's Run today. How's he doing?" He smiled and typed back. "Ranger's here, warm and at peace. How about you?" She replied. "I'm okay. Thank you for giving him a home, something I couldn't do." Caleb set the phone down and looked at Ranger. It lifted its head, as if sensing his gaze, then slowly got up, walked over, and rested its muzzle on his knee. Those deep black eyes no longer held fear or resignation. Instead, they shone with absolute trust, a peace Caleb knew they had found together. He gently stroked its head, whispering, "You've saved me as much as I saved you, haven't you?" Ranger let out a soft, warm whimper, a small sound, like an answer. Outside, the cold wind blew, but inside this little house, no darkness could reach them. Caleb thought back to the day he first saw Ranger on the tracks, a broken soul, ready to let go. Now here it was, not just surviving but truly living, with a name, a home, and a person it had chosen to trust completely. He stood and opened the door to the porch. Ranger followed, stepping out to stand beside him, looking up at the star-filled sky. Its breath mingled with the cold air, forming tiny puffs of white. Caleb knelt down, wrapping his arms around it, feeling the steady beat of Ranger's heart beneath his hands. "We did it, boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "From now on, only good days ahead." Ranger leaned its head against his shoulder, and in that moment, under the winter night, they were more than man and dog, they were family. The window behind them glowed with the fire's light, a quiet witness. Outside, snow continued to fall, but in their hearts, spring had bloomed long ago. A soul once abandoned had found its way home, and a heart once lost had learned to love again. For Ranger, life was no longer cold rails or the roar of a train. It was this house, this man, these peaceful days they would walk through together, forever.